Okay, welcome back everyone. It's 12/4 of 2015. We're going to take a look at Jean Hyppolite again. We're going to take a look at his masterwork of Logic and Existence, which was basically a look at Hegel's logic after he had already written the work on Hegel's phenomenology. But one of the most difficult texts in philosophy today is attempting to understand Hegel's logic. And Hyppolite actually gives us one of the best expositions of Hegel's logic ever done. It's really a tremendous work. It got a lot of recognition. And really ended up shaping the emerging French thought. And it really had even quite a bit of influence toward the development of the French postmodern movement. And consequently, it has a great deal of influence even today in postmodern philosophy and postmodern theology. But it also is just very simply a great exposition of Hegel's logic and Hegel's epistemology. So it's really, in its purity, it's just a tremendous presentation of the epistemology of Hegel, concentrating on the logic. And that's why we want to approach it today. We want to approach it as an exposition of the logic. We're going to take a look at it in the following moments. The logic in itself as the ineffable. Logic going out of itself as ex hypothese. Logic returning to itself as the being for another. Then art as the appearance, as the mediation to the moment of sense and existence, and then the realm of positing, and then finally the realm of existence as our final moment. So basically he presents a triad. He presents a triad of beginning with a logic, then he's going to pass through appearance to reach existence. So the title of the work is Logic and Existence. It could easily have been entitled Logic, Appearance, and Existence, because he will mention the mediation. So we're going to address it as this triad, and the first three moments are going to address logic, and then the last three moments will address appearance, realm of positing, and existence. So let's begin by addressing the logic. We'll go to the first moment, logic in itself as the ineffable, and general characteristics consist of the fact that the logic of logos seeks to articulate the reflection of being back into itself for Hegel. It is a fusion that seeks to create a demonstration of truth as the fusion of actuality and sense together in the realm of positing, which is a key realm for Hegel's philosophy and Hegel's epistemology. So it will articulate the perpetual movement of the eidos forms. We form a diversified system of the eidos nodes, or the eidos forms, contained and arranged in a dialectical chain. And then we express this linguistically through logic, beginning with logic. So it's all about an eidos form or sign model construction that will be made present in the realm of positing. This is the premise for Hegel's epistemology. That is the most general characteristic. It addresses the eidos forms arranged as a sign model or a dialectical chain sign model. Now the voice of logic, being becomes a voice that no longer sounds like the familiar, but it becomes understood as a type of transcendence. A transcendence in language. Our dialogical language becomes a manipulation of the signs, so our arrangement of these eidos signs becomes a manipulation concerning their interrelatedness and manipulation concerning their content through our dialogical exchange of language with others in dialogue at the De Kunta threshold. Now the ineffable or that which is too great to be described. Being has an ineffable nature which becomes an object of faith because it's beyond all conceptualization. That's the paradox here for Hyppolite. And he says that basically Hegel proposes a paradox because any articulation of being is beyond conceptualization, because being is always a surplus. It always exists as a surplus in reality. Therefore, we can only grasp it by faith. We can't grasp it by precise conceptualization. So the premise is that finite knowledge must negate itself for the apprehension of faith to occur. There must be a first step of negation to negate the sensate, to negate the finite veil that veils the true object of faith, the true concept of being. So faith apprehends the unconditional, the unconditioned, the pure singularity of a thing. So the things of actuality are addressed, and we seek to unveil that finitude, or the sensate, in order to reach the pure singularity of the concept of being. Each thing becomes a thing in itself outside the absolute. So we are dealing with a multiplicity of things that we encounter in reality, and our goal is to grasp the eidos form that each thing contains by negating the finitude of knowledge, or negating the sensate veil that veils the eidos form. So this is the essential starting point for Hegel and for Hyppolite. Now, reaching objectivity, absolute knowledge comes to be accepted as the whole of human experience. It's an organism, it's a holistic organism of truth. This absolute includes our self-conscious self-identity. We posit a discourse of being, that dialogical result at the Dekunta threshold, in the attempt to reach an intersubjective universal recognition. So transcendence becomes equated with intersubjectivity for Hegel and for Hyppolite. To do this, we must transcend the master-slave limitation at the Dekunta threshold. We can't just exist for ourselves. We can't exist in pure ego state at the Dekunta threshold if we're going to acquire truth through dialogue. We can only acquire truth through dialogue. We can only acquire eidos forms through dialogue if we are willing to exist for the other. The concept of hupakaimenon, and hupakaimenon equals that which lies underneath, or substance. That is the Greek word for substance. Hupakaimenon is substance as opposed to the finitude of accident. So we're seeking the eidos form of the hupakaimenon, or the unconditional substance. We're seeking the eidos form of the unconditional substance for each of the multiplicity of things we confront in reality. And we want to acquire that lexical network. So next we're going to take a look at block 2, which is going to be the logic going out of itself as ex hypothese, or being flung back into the modality. Or basically it means to be flung back into mediation after confronting the impossibility of being able to conceptualize these eidos forms of the unconditional absolute. Once we run into the paradox, once we run into the paradox of truth, the paradox of aletheia truth, and realize that we can't really say, here's what Hyppolite wants to emphasize concerning Hegel, we realize we can't speak that which we apprehend. We cannot say that which we apprehend as being. Being is not possible to be spoken. It's the paradox. It refuses conceptualization because it is a surplus of being. So we are cast back onto ourselves and cast back into the realm of mediation, and trying to find some way, some mediation, in order to assist us in apprehending this truth of being, which defies all speech, all conceptualization. So raising the self to becoming a selfless soul, the initial consciousness is a perception of feeling. We grasp singularity but try to say it as a universality. We try to say universality, but it is always just slightly out of our reach. We possess a pre-existing set of categories, according to Hegel, and that is the interpretive filter through which we experience our sensing. That's key to understand for Hegel. Whenever you study Hegel's phenomenology, everyone eventually understands that a pre-understanding is posited by Hegel at all times, no matter where he begins. From wherever he speaks within his dialectical circle, he always presumes a pre-understanding. We do possess a set of categories from previous praxis, actions, and returns that has been stored in our intellective memory. We do have a interpretive set of categories that pre-exist from previous experience, and they are used to help us to grasp our intuitive sensing. We reach generalization, we end up acquiring the abstract elements and abstract powers of reality, and we possess an intentionality of desiring to master these generalities. So what Hegel tells us is that in this initial stage of grasping singularity and trying to say universality, we can't quite get to it. The best that we can do is we can get to a generalization of the sensate. We can reach a generalization of the intuitive perception of feeling, but that's as far as we can get. We can't get any further than a generalization which is acquired pretty much on our own previous pre-understanding and the categories that we unconsciously hold in the intellective memory. So we do acquire a generalization of the perception of feeling. And this is the initial consciousness. The initial consciousness is that of acquiring abstract generalizations through intuitive feeling, or in other words, they're feeling percepts. They're not cognitive concepts, they are feeling percepts, and a lot of times that hyphenated term is used. But Hegel tells us initially we acquire feeling percepts of generalization. So the big problem is, how do we raise this initial consciousness to the more significant self-consciousness? And Hyppolite gives us 8 aspects or steps. There is the intuition of notion. We sense a higher intuition of being beyond this language of generalization. We go to the Dekunta threshold of dialogue. We grasp the necessity of dialogue and awareness of the collective self that's also evolving along with our awareness of the IDAS forms. The concept of doxa opinion emerges here, and doxa opinion is the supposition of truth that each individual brings to the dialogue threshold. So the term doxa opinion emerges. We all possess an opinion, a supposed truth concerning an IDAS form, but through dialogue we can reach that IDAS form and transcend generalization and reach a deeper self-consciousness. Now there's a sublation. We sublate the idea of the generalization, which was acquired through the negation and the realm of feeling percepts, and we enter into a new generic concept of self-becoming through dialogue. So now we're involved in self-becoming through dialogue at the Dekunta threshold, and that's going to create a new birth. The death of generalization becomes the birth of life in the spirit. So we're born to an entirely new process by recognizing the imperative of dialogue in order to reach the collective identity of self, the intersubjective identity of self. We sublate this previous consciousness of generalization, and we seek to live a new life in the spirit of dialogue at the Dekunta threshold. And we realize that substance, or the concept of hupakaimanon, is actually a life of becoming. It is a movement. That's the first truth that is grasped in these 8 steps, and that is that hupakaimanon substance is a movement and not a static thing. The eidos form is a movement of substance, a movement of universality. It's not a static thing, it is a movement, it is a life as becoming. So we reach a new kind of a realism. Nature is that which veils and reflects the universal self-consciousness, which will be posited in the realm of positing as the logos of our dialogical language. So substance is movement. Eidos form is really, for self-consciousness, it is eidos principle. So now we're not examining first static forms, we're examining first fluid principles. We're trying to acquire the universality of the eidos form movement, the movement of being, through dialogue at the Dakunta threshold. It's a tremendous transition. So, note 3, we reach that ex hypothese of being thrust out of generalization, which was the previous case, and recognizing the necessity of the mediation of dialogue at the Dakunta threshold and the mediation of perceiving substance as movement, or eidos form as principle. We recognize a new necessity for substance, a new necessity for hupakaimanon, and we are interested in defining this positive content. We turn back from the burden of mediation, because it's work. We kind of try to retreat back into ourselves, but we can't do that. We realize that that's an illusion, according to Hegel. It's an illusion to turn back into pure subjectivity. So what happens instead is that we generate and posit a new generic concept, and that new generic concept is destiny, which means we live according to self-consciousness and mediation at the Dakunta threshold in order to create a sign model that reflects the movement of eidos form. So we end up making a huge transition from the consciousness of feeling percepts to the self-consciousness of acquiring the hupakaimanon substance as a movement of principles. That's a tremendous shift in what our eschatological goal is for our realm of positing. And that takes us to the third moment of logic, as in block 4 of the return into self-consciousness as a welcoming act, or realize that we need to be for another at the Dakunta threshold. The ineffable hupakaimanon of substance of the first moment and the ex hypothese of the second moment come together as a gnosis of recognition in 13 aspects. We enter into a new idea of epistemology. Epistemology is recognition. Knowledge is recognition. Gnosis is recognition. We begin with anagnoridzai, and anagnoridzai means to enter into a reciprocal recognition of the other self. Each individual bringing their supposed truth of the eidos is to be accepted and welcomed as participating in the dialogue of reaching the principle of movement. Retreating into the inner life is an illusion, and language, our language that evolves out of this dialogue, becomes the actual being of spirit. The other self at the Dakunta threshold helps us to raise our dialogue to true universality. So this speech, this reciprocal speech, transposes particularity into universality. Reciprocal, welcoming speech at the dialogue threshold transposes particularity into universality. It becomes speech act. So self-identity emerges out of this being for another. By going out of ourselves for another, we actually reach a true self-identity. The absolute becomes equal to the discourse of being. Being, or the absolute, is equal to this discourse at the Dakunta threshold. And substance presents itself as a subject, because we end up positing a third-party workspace as a de Kundt threshold in order to continually work on the concepts of universality. We kind of posit a third-party workspace, which is kind of a virtual subject of the universal. So the self, or man, becomes the intersecting point of the logos, and it's very Platonic because the eidos forms intersect in humanity for Hegel. Hyppolite tells us, and he says this is very Platonic because, remember, the eidos forms for Plato can be grasped because we have a pre-existing awareness of them in the intellective soul. And this idea that in humanity, in the self, the logos intersects is very much a Hegelian idea also. It's very Platonic. So speculative logic and the philosophy of history end up intersecting each other because they're going to meet within the self. So eidos sense develops itself as this discourse of being at the de Kundt threshold. And key, the realm of positing, emerges as the internality that is also a posited externality. So the realm of positing emerges as this place of being, this space of being. So in these first three moments, Hyppolite explains Hegel's logic in three concepts. I mean, it's a great summary model. If you look at the center of the page, you've got your hypokaimenon substance, you got your ex hypothese of being thrown back into the necessity of mediation, and your anagnoridzai of dialogue, of the reciprocal recognition that gnosis is reciprocal recognition, becomes the mediation between that which is ineffable and cannot be explained and the fact that we are thrown back on ourselves in needing to explain it and needing to reach it. We realize that the mediation is anagnoridzai, or reciprocal dialogue that can transpose particularity into universality as speech act. Being becomes speech act. Tremendous summary when you can actually say, well, I can get a snapshot. I can get a snapshot of Hegel's logic as hypokaimenon, ex hypothese, and anagnoridzai. Those three concepts give me a snapshot of Hegel's logic. So it's a great tool, and with that snapshot we can move on to understanding how do we get from this speculative logic to reaching the act of existence, and how do we recognize, how do we know from this speculative logic what the act of existence is. For Hegel, what is truly going to be the act of existence? If speculative logic is a speech act, if it is an act which takes place eventually in the space of the realm of positing, then what can be the act of existence? And how do I get there? How do I get out of phenomenology and get into historical reality? How do I transition from phenomenology to historical reality? And Hyppolite says that Hegel tells us essentially that we get there through appearance, and appearance becomes the key mediation from phenomenology to historical reality, and that is appearance as art. Appearance as art. And so if you look at Block 5, appearance as the intermediary to existence as sense, the logic of phenomenology in the moments of Block 1, 2, and 4 transition to absolute knowledge as sense through the mediation of prophetic appearance. Prophetic appearance. And the three stages are the dialectic of the absolute, the self's thoughtful mediation between sense and sensate things, and then the engendering of signification through art. That's your mediation. And Hyppolite tells us that ultimately for Hegel it's poetry. That's the pinnacle, the triad of poetry, narrates reality for us, it creates poetic narrative. As the sensible in epic poetry, as the thoughtful in lyric poetry, and as the signifying in dramatic poetry. So you've got the sensible, the thoughtful, and the signifying, which corresponds perfectly with the logic we just discussed. But you've got that sensible, the thoughtful, and the signifying. Epic, lyric, and dramatic poetry. So poetry presents existence as artistic appearance, an artistic appearing narrative. It unveils the character of the completeness of the absolute. Art expresses being as a prophetic soul, leading us to reach the self as soul. So it's a way of being which is prior to speech. Art is like the mediating prior moment to speech in history. So a tremendous articulation here, because we never get, usually from other commentators, we don't really get an exposition of art as the mediation of gnosis. But for Hyppolite, he says Hegel's epistemology must include appearance as prophetic appearance, and prophetic appearance will lead us to existence. Now we move on to note C. You've got the movement of aufgehoben, and we'll start with habit. The self develops a habit of value by thoughtfully giving being itself objective value through the self. This realm of positing that we are developing ends up being a realm of the internality that is posited as an externality of objective value signs. It's a sign model of objective value signs. We develop a habit of the formation of this value sign system. We articulate the movement of the IDOS forms in thought, so it's a fluid model that we construct, and it's through the process of dialogue at the Dekunte threshold, which is a dialogue of aufgehoben, and aufgehoben is the German for negating the sensate, preserving the ideal that is present, and then creating the transcendent notion or the transcendent sign, which signifies that ideality that was veiled by the sensate. So there's a negation, a preservation, and then a transcendence of signification. Aufgehoben is a three-part dialogue process at the Dekunte threshold of negation, preservation, and transcendence. That ends us up at the realm of positing. We form the positing of our active existence through our intellective faculty, or for Hegel, the faculty of reason. So that brings us to a very key component. The additional mediation is going to be the realm of positing, or nemasune, block 6, nemasune, or positing. Nemasune means to keep in mind, coupled with a solicitude concerning truth. And that's Hippolyte's term. Hyppolite says that that is the term we should adopt for the realm of positing. When we look at Hegel, nemasune is the Greek concept that describes the realm of positing. It is a memory-based. We keep in mind the eidos truths coupled with a solicitude concerning truth as that habit of value. Now, in the realm of positing, the potential soul develops into free experience, and the formation of the sign model as an internal that is posited as an externality. The realm of positing is an internal externality. It is based on memory or recollection of the truth. It's a memory of language. It includes a genus. We arrange the eidos forms according to a fixed genus or an eschatological horizon for our thought. We do possess an eschatological horizon of our thought. Now, for Plato and for Aristotle, that was an eschatological horizon of the good. So if Hegel is being Platonic here, according to Hyppolite, then it would be the eschatological horizon of the good that guides and overarches our eidos sign model construction. He uses the concept of apos, which is primordial language. Our realm of positing will contain just the right names, just the right eidos sign names, and the sign model will be constructed of the onama, topa, es, or sign names that are in a specific position. Because you got onama, name, you got topos, place. So it's names in a specific place. Sign names placed in a specific geometric place. That is becomes our IDOS sign model of the movement or the principles of movement. And abstraction is served by the concept of position, by the reality of locating their position for each ideality of a thing. And this will transcend symbolism, because symbolism is sensate-based and signification is not sensate-based. It's based on that transposition of particularity into universality. So it does represent transcendence for Hegel and for Hyppolite. So what is existence? Block 7. Objective existence equals a speech act. It is life as discursive development. It is the space of names in externality. In our external reality, the space of the names that we have generated in the realm of positing equals the absolute in externality, the space of names. It is the self's certainty of immediacy by taking up that eschatological horizon. And it is the objective intelligible speech as intersubjective universality or intersubjective transcendence. That's the way that transcendence evolves for Hegel and for Hyppolite. So we end up with the triad being fully articulated here in this chart. Blocks 1, 2, and 4 represent the triad of logic. And then out of the triad of logic, we pass through block 5, which is that mediation of art as prophetic appearance. And the pinnacle of art is poetry. So you've got poetry as that prophetic narration that wants to remind us of the eschatological horizon of the absolute. So the poetic narrative prophetically leads us forward into the habit of value and assigning values to the IDOS forms that we acquire. And that becomes a habit of assigning value. We learn how to see reality in spirit, to live in the freedom of spirit, as Hegel puts it. We learn how to live according to the habit of value, or you could call it the habit of virtue, and perceive reality as spirit, and habitually acquire these value signs, and then arrange them in a fluidity that reflects the movement of substance as principle rather than static thing. And that will wrap up our look at Logic and Existence by Jean Hyppolite, first published in the French in 1953.